Still on chapter 22, and now we're going to talk about the lungs and the pleurae. A little bit about the gross anatomy of the lung. I'm not actually going to ask you any of these questions on the exam, but basically the lungs occupy all the thoracic cavity except for the mediastinum. We have the root. This is going to be the site of vascular and bronchial attachment to the mediastinum. There's costal surfaces. The apex is the superior tip, and the base is the inferior surface that rests on the diaphragm. Then we have the hilum, and this is found on the mediastinal surface, and it is important because it is the site for entry and exit of blood vessels, bronchi, lymphatic vessels, and nerves. The left lung is separated into two lobes, the superior and inferior lobes. It is smaller than the right lung because of the position of the heart. There's this thing called the cardiac notch, which is a concavity for the heart to fit into. Then we have the right lung, which is separated into three lobes, the superior, middle, and inferior lobes. So, there we go, cursor. Superior, inferior. Superior, middle, inferior. And then the apex of the lung would be up here. Down here would be the base. I just left this in here just so you could see an actual picture of a part of the lung. Then each lobe is going to divide further into bronchopulmonary segments, 10 on the right, 8 to 10 on the left, and they're going to be connected by connective tissue septa. The really cool thing is that each segment is served by its own artery, vein, and bronchus, and this means that if one segment is diseased, it can be individually removed. Lobules are the smallest subdivisions that are visible to the naked eye, and there are hexagonal segments that are served by bronchioles and their main branches. Now, lungs are mostly composed of alveoli. The rest consist of stroma, which is elastic connective tissue, and that's going to make the lungs very elastic and spongy. This is a cast of a bronchial tree. This is just showing how the branches just get smaller and smaller, and eventually the cross-sectional area increases. Now, lungs are perfused by two circulations. It's kind of like the heart, right? So whenever you look at the heart, you have the blood that's flowing through the heart, right? That you may have at one point thought that particular blood is what supplies the oxygen and nutrients to the heart muscle itself, but then you later found out that that's what coronary circulation does. We have kind of a similar situation with the lungs. We have pulmonary circulation, and pulmonary circulation, we have pulmonary arteries delivering systemic venous blood from the heart to the lungs for oxygenation. It branches profusely to feed into pulmonary capillary networks, and then the pulmonary veins are going to carry the oxygenated blood from the respiratory zones back to the left side of the heart, right? So pulmonary arteries are leaving the right side of the heart, pulmonary veins are bringing it back to the left side of the heart. This is a low pressure, high volume system. But what's important is that this is not what's going to be providing the oxygen to the lung tissue itself. Lung capillary endothelium contains many enzymes that act on different substances of the blood, like angiotensin converting enzyme that acts on the blood pressure hormone. So you remember we talked about the renin system back in chapters. We talked about it in a couple of different chapters. The renin angiotensin. Let's see, what was it? Chapter 16, and then later again in chapter maybe 19. And we'll talk about it again when we talk about the urinary system. Then we have bronchial circulation. And bronchial circulation is what's going to actually provide oxygenated blood to the lung tissue. The bronchial arteries are going to arise from the aorta and enter the hilum, and they are part of the systemic circulation, so they're high pressure, low volume. They supply all the lung tissue except for the alveoli. and bronchial veins anastomose with pulmonary veins, and the pulmonary veins are going to carry most of the venous blood back to the heart. Lungs are innervated by both parasympathetic and sympathetic motor fibers, as well as visceral sensory fibers. Parasympathetic fibers cause bronchoconstriction. Sympathetic cause bronchodilation. So if you remember back to AMP1, and I know I say this a lot, right? I say you need to remember back to AMP1 because AMP1 was really important. It provided the foundation for you to understand stuff in AMP2. But if you remember back to when we talked about the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system, sympathetic nervous system is trying to get you prepared to go into fight, flight, or I guess it doesn't really prepare you to freeze, but some people do freeze. It's really preparing you for fight or flight. And in order to prepare you for fight or flight, it needs to bronchodilate to allow more oxygen to get into the blood to where you can run or you can fight or do whatever it is you need to do to get through that situation. Pleurae, thin, double-layered serous membrane that divides the thoracic cavity into two pleural compartments and a mediastinum. The parietal pleura is the membrane on the thoracic wall. Superior face of diaphragm around the heart and between the lungs, and the visceral pleura is the membrane on the actual lung itself. Now, just like we talked about with the heart, the lungs also have this cavity between the two layers. So remember, when we talked about the heart, we talked about the pericardium, and there's the visceral pericardium and the parietal pericardium. So same thing here. We have the visceral pleura and the parietal pleura. In between, there's a cavity. And in this cavity, we find pleural fluid. And the pleural fluid is going to provide lubrication and surface tension that's going to help assist in the expansion and recoil of lungs. So the visceral pleura is going to be on the lung, and the parietal pleura is on the thoracic wall, around the heart, superior surface of the diaphragm. And then here is your question. I hope you have a wonderful day.